on.
For all you viewers out there in TV land, please note that there will be a 3-minute production delay between the live event that you are viewing and the meeting participants. The question and answer function is open for questions on agenda items for this virtual meeting. Questions that are posed during the meeting will be addressed at the end of the session. Good evening. I acknowledge on behalf of the Board of Trustees that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Likwitah people. I am John Kerr, Chairperson of School District 72 Board of Education. In attendance virtually this evening is Vice Chair Kat Eddy and Trustees Joyce McMahon, Susan Wilson, Daryl Hagan, Shannon Briggs, and Richard Franklin. Also in attendance are Superintendent Jeremy Morrow, Associate Superintendents Morgan Kyle and Phil Sismic, as well as Secretary Treasurer Kevin Patrick. Present also are Natalie Crawshaw, Assistant to the Secretary Treasurer, Jennifer Patrick, Community Engagement Officer, and providing technical support is Barbara Drake, Manager of IT. With COVID-19 cases continuing, we've gone to a virtual format for our public meeting for the past couple of months on the direction of the District Health Officer through the Environmental Safety Officer. This step was taken in order to maintain compliance with the Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry's order, which restricts the board's ability to meet in person. The order will be in effect until it is rescinded. When the order is rescinded, the board will revisit that decision. Otherwise, the board will continue to meet virtually until such time as it is given direction that in-person meetings are permitted. Our board continues to take precautions and to make accommodations where possible to protect the health and safety of all members of our learning community. I would like to acknowledge that Friday, May 12th, I believe, was the first anniversary of the declaration of a pandemic by the World Health Organization. It's been a long year and very tough for people, some more than others, but with the advent of mass vaccinations and numbers sort of leveling out, it's easy to see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's not a time to relax. So I would just encourage the community to continue to take the responsibility or the responsible actions that they've been doing for the past year, and pretty soon we'll be past that. Yesterday, as I read through the BCSTA's daily news for school trustees, I came across an article from the Castlegar News entitled "Province Announces Major Rebuild for Glen Mary Elementary." This school was built in 1959, so it is of a similar vintage to School District 72's Cedar Elementary, which was built in 2 stages, the first completed in 1957 and the second in 1964. This article goes on to note that the Glen Mary Elementary PAC has been advocating for a new school since 2018, when they invited Trail City Council to quote, see the extent of the school's disrepair and enlisted the help of Kootenay West MLA Katrine Conroy, unquote. The article goes on to state that with the combined support of the community, the city, and the Kootenay Columbia School District 20 board, their cause was finally heard and the rebuild to be realized. Compare that with Cedar Elementary, which, as I have already noted, was built in 2 stages in 1957 and 1964. The Facilities Rating Index, a provincial measure for the condition of public buildings, including schools, rates Cedar Elementary at 0.69. For reference, any number greater than 0.60 is categorized as very poor. While the article mentioned that Glen Mary Elementary has had a couple of renovations, to my knowledge, Cedar Elementary has been repaired but has had no major renovations in its 57+ year history. I will point out that the replacement of Cedar Elementary has been the first priority of the School District 72 capital plan for the past 5 or more years, and that the board has met with the 2 previous ministers of education on 3 occasions to advocate for the replacement of the school. This was in addition to meeting with the previous MLA on the same subject and discussions with City Council as well. The chair of the Glen Mary PAC stated, quote, This rebuild will allow our children space to grow, learn, and develop, and will provide life-changing opportunities for many years to come, unquote. School District 20 Board Chair, Catherine Zitzoff, remarked that, quote, supporting families in growing communities like Trail means making investments to ensure schools can give students the best educational experience possible. The new Glen Mary Elementary School will almost double its current capacity, providing engaging, inspiring classrooms that will help children thrive in their education for many years to come. The article also points out that, quote, to further benefit families in Trail, the new Glen Mary will be home to a neighborhood learning center that will provide community programming as well as before and after school childcare. Quote, access to affordable, quality, and inclusive childcare close to home makes it easier for families to put down roots and plan for the future, unquote, said Catherine Conroy, MLA for Kootenay West. By investing in childcare on school grounds, we can help make things so much easier for busy families while inspiring a lifelong appreciation for learning in young children. The ministry took additional circumstances into account, including the need for a larger school when the decision was made to replace the Castlegar School. I'm pleased that School District 20 will be able to build a new school. However, after more than 6 years on this board, I am frustrated with the ministry's seeming inattention to the serious needs that School District 72 has at Cedar Elementary. I refer to the comments above about the value of having a new school that, quote, can give students the best educational experience possible, that will provide, quote, engaging, inspiring classrooms that will help children thrive in their education for many years to come, unquote, and that, quote, by investing in childcare on school grounds, we can make things so much easier for busy families while inspiring a lifelong appreciation for learning in young children, unquote. I wish for the same opportunities for the students of Cedar Elementary that a new school would provide for it, that the new school will provide for its students in Castlegar. One can only dream. Okay, we will then move on to item number 2, which is the superintendent's remarks.
Thank you very much, Board Chair Kerr. I just want to let everyone know that tomorrow student-led conferences will be happening, and they're happening at all elementary and middle schools as well as at Robron. And of course, with COVID protocols in place this year, these conferences are happening using a wide range of different technologies rather than face-to-face. I want to share some exciting news about the district battles that happened this morning. So this is the Battle of the Books. Zones happened last week, and we had the big playoffs today with the district. And I believe that teacher librarian Jenica German and Principal Navenka Fair pulled off for the first ever a Battle of the Books sweep. So Pinecrest teams won grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5. So I want to give a special congratulations to the Pinecrest teams, but also congratulations to all of the staff and students who participated, and a special thank you to our teacher librarians for supporting this initiative. Last week, Timberline students and staff did an amazing job with their musical Once Upon a Mattress, which is a take on The Princess and the Pea. They accomplished this. They've been practicing all year with masks, being socially distant, and then hosted a number of evenings doing a live stream event. And I want to commend them for their excellent musical and the additional pieces that they took on to produce such a nice technical job with all of the filming and everything else. So again, it just speaks to the commitment of those educators to ensure that those students still had the opportunity to do something that they're so passionate about. So congratulations to Timberline on an excellent production. I also want to provide a little bit more attention to some middle school initiatives that have been taking place. And although they have picked up some much deserved attention, I wanted to bring us back to those initiatives. So there was a kindness initiative that was initiated by 2 teachers, Karen Lutz and Kelsey Creviston at Phoenix, that ended up involving a significant number of our schools. And our students wrote over 600 personal notes of thanks and encouragement to our community's first responders. It was featured on Saturday night on Check TV as one of their good news stories. And having seen some of the art and some of the messages, I know that it mattered quite a bit to our first responders throughout the community, and special thanks to all those that were involved in supporting that initiative. Another initiative that's received some positive attention this week is grade 6-7 class at Phoenix. teacher Tara Gordon's class. After reading the book A Long Walk to Water, the class was inspired to raise funds to support accessible water in South Sudan. So they've set an ambitious goal of raising $8,000. So we will make sure that the link for that fundraiser is on our website. So if there's anybody listening that's wanting to help support those students with that initiative, please feel free to do that. But again, it was a student-led initiative responding to a book that they'd read as a class. I'm also glad tonight to report to the board that there's been no further exposure events since our last board meeting. With spring break coming up, I'll just echo Chairperson Kerr's encouragement to continue to have our community follow public health protocols, which helps us keep our schools safe as possible. And it was just over a year ago that we were canceling student trips that were planned to go to Italy, Greece, and England. On the 12th of March, we canceled all school and district related events as health officials began cautioning against large gatherings. And then it was on March 23rd last year that in-class instruction was suspended all the way until June 1st. There is no doubt that COVID-19 has been challenging to address over this past year, and I know that families, staff, and students have all taken on more than ever in order to make it all work. With more optimistic news coming about how the summer and fall may look, I know personally that I'm really looking forward to returning to a time when COVID-19 doesn't take up so much space in our conversations, and when we can go back to enjoying the company of others and not virtually or on Teams. And while we still have a ways to go, I am just wanting to express my gratitude to the many ways that the whole learning community has joined together to support our students. And so I wish our staff, our students, and their families a restful and much deserved spring break.
Thank you, Superintendent Morrow. You have in your package the minutes of the meeting of February 23rd, 2021. The suggested motion is that the minutes of the meeting of February 23rd, 2021 are hereby approved as circulated. Do we have a mover for that motion? Okay, Trustee Eddy, seconded by Trustee McMahon. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Or raise your hand. Or raise your hand. Opposed? The motion is carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. Are there any alterations or additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none then. We will move to the approval of the agenda, and the suggested motion will be that the agenda is hereby approved as circulated. Could we have a mover for that motion, please? Trustee Franklin and Trustee Wilson. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
We're going to have to decide what to do here. Maybe we'll just raise hands, okay? All right, the motion is opposed, sorry? None? Okay, the motion is passed. We'll move to the report of board decisions from the March 16th, 2021 confidential meeting. Trustee Eddy.
The report for the March 16th confidential meeting where matters were discussed around lands and legal. We have concluded our agenda and we'll be finished for the evening.
Thank you. I should have introduced you as Vice Chair, Eddy. Thank you. Okay, there are there's no correspondence, public submissions, or agenda submissions, so we'll move to educational submissions and the Superintendent's report on achievement. Dr. Morrow, you're on.
Great, thank you very much, Chair Kerr. Tonight, I appreciate this opportunity to share both with the board and the public last year's student achievement data. I will acknowledge that tonight, most of the data that I'm going to be sharing is quantitative data, so we're really trying to get a look at some of the numbers. This is an important step to do to ensure that both the board and the public are hearing about our progress towards our goals that have been articulated in the strategic plan. I also want to just specify, and I think it's really important to clarify that although tonight I'm sharing data that has numbers, that each of those numbers represents individual stories and individual students. And the way that we are going to improve our data is by working individually with individual students to ensure that every possibility for positive future life outcomes are taken in our district. So this data will show where some of that work is that we'll need to focus in on and where some of the improvement can be noted, as well as some of the successes that we can celebrate. Wanted to mention as well this year that last year was a significant shift for us in moving from our previous student information system to MyEdBC. We're now aligned with all districts in the province around the student information system. And so I am pleased to share that we will have increasing access to data as a result of that change, and that we will have the ability to more clearly determine and answer the question of how are we doing. And so I also would like to share that as a result of the pandemic, there are some spring assessments that we've done historically in the district that were not able to conclude last year. So there's a little bit of data gap from the spring as a result of COVID. But there are a number of pieces of data that I'll share tonight where I'm also aware that there are some slides with a lot of information. This slide deck will be made available on the public website. So if there's more time needed to really review some of those slides, we'll certainly do that. But in the sake of keeping the presentation concise, we will move through some of that information fairly quickly. It's important to be reminded of our priority number 1 with 4 articulated specific goals related and pertaining to student achievement. The 4 goals are that students will fully meet or exceed expectations of literacy and numeracy, that we will see improved graduation rates, that there will be parity across all measures for Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, and that we will have clear and consistent achievement data, which I'm pleased to share with you tonight. I will be sharing, as a result of that, of our goal to have equity across all measures, the information that I'm sharing tonight will have disaggregated data that shows the achievement of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, as that is a goal that clearly we need to continue to make some progress in. And we'll see that reflected in the data tonight. So this year, our student data, there's some general information that is there. One of the pieces that has not been there is the approximate 400 students that are being served through one of our eHub or online programs this year. So it's a significant increase as a result of parents choosing and the district providing that opportunity for students to have a different environment as a result of some of the concerns expressed by community regarding COVID. And there's been quite a significant drop in international students. We've had some who were with us all year last year and stayed with us this year. There is a vulnerability rate for the region, which I will express a little further, so we'll cover that a little bit more in detail. It's important to be reminded of our vision, which is that School District 72 is committed and dedicated to the achievement of personal excellence for all members of its learning community. And it's important to note that piece around personal excellence. Tonight we will be comparing district data to provincial data. Within that, though, is still plenty of room for individuals to find personal excellence. And so tonight we're really holding up our district to provincial results for accountability. I want to start just with some data from the Early Developmental Index. This is a data project that actually provides quite a bit of information about how our students are arriving in our schools. So the EDI, and there's quite a few, we have the EDI and an MDI. The EDI is taken in kindergarten, and it helps us understand how our students are arriving at school. There is 5 sort of domains that are measured: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. When we look at our results in Campbell River, you'll see that in the red sort of the right-hand side in the upper quadrant. The red shows we're the gray bar in each of the documents, and the red shows that 35% of our students are reflected in at least one or more of the categories of vulnerability. So that means 1 in 3 students that are showing up in kindergarten have some degree of vulnerability. And I want to just clarify what vulnerability, or how it is defined in the EDI instrument. In the EDI instrument, vulnerability is defined as children who, without additional support and care, are more likely to experience challenges in their school years and beyond. So you can see that approximately 1 in 3 students needs to ensure that is provided with some additional supports. You'll notice that the gray bar of Campbell River is fairly in the middle or close to provincial average, but there's one particular domain where we're to the far right, which is in the range of the language and cognitive development. So I want to speak to that for a moment. And also note that the ranges in the red quadrant range from 13 to 54% of vulnerability on 1 or more scale, and that in Campbell River we're at 35%. So our most recent EDI scales indicate a significant increase in vulnerability around language and cognitive development for our kindergarten students, changing from 9 to 16% since the last wave when we did this data. It's important to note that there's also a product called the Toddler Development Index, and that there's some intersection between this statistic and what we're hearing and learning from the Toddler Development Index, which occurs through registered childcare facilities in Campbell River. This data, which connected with census and healthcare information, also shows that less than half of the vulnerable preschool population is accessing supports that are available in the community. So this leads to a reasonable hypothesis that we have a substantial and growing portion of our preschool population which are not having the same stimulation exposure that's needed to help grow their cognitive and early language skills before kindergarten when the EDI takes place. So I know that there's some real advocates for high quality, accessible, and affordable childcare, and this kind of data clearly indicates why that access is so important. I'd also like to share that this isn't a community problem or a parent problem. This is also us as a school needing to change the range of how we define school preparedness. So we need to figure out how to adapt better to where those learners are beginning, and that we're going to have to look differently at how our primary and some of the interventions that are necessary in order for those students to get the necessary supports to be successful. I'm going to share, again, we're moving fairly quickly into the MDI, which is the Middle Developmental Index. This is a new measure for us as a district. We participated in the last year for the first time. This is a slightly different measure. Instead of exploring vulnerabilities, it explores assets. So this is looking at what assets students have in our district. The absence of these assets could be inferred to be vulnerable, but let's have a quick look at what those what they're reporting on. So this is because the nature of the students that are being measured, we're looking at, they do a self-reflective exercise, a self-reporting questionnaire, where they self-report on their sense of optimism, self-esteem, happiness, absence of sadness, their general health, their connectedness at school, in community, and at home, their friendships, their use of after-school time, and a measure of some of their school experiences. So here we have a scale showing our grade 4's asset index. On the left is Campbell River, and on the right is the province. So you can see, well, all participating districts. And you can see that by and large, our grade 4's report that they are doing generally well and are above provincial average. So well within the provincial range. So those are the presence of assets. When we look at their well-being index, which measures their sense of optimism, happiness, self-esteem, their absence of sadness, and their general health, we can see again that we're very comparable to all participating districts. We have 2% more that are thriving and 2% more that are low, and a decrease in the middle range. And you can see the definition of thriving. Those are children who score high range on at least 4 of the 5 measures and no low range scores, etc. What's important to note is that right now we have the Campbell River wheel compared to the all participating districts wheel. But within our district and amongst the various schools, there is a very significant changes and differences between our schools. So although this graph just shows Campbell River as a whole, within that is a wide range of experiences for our children. This is one of those graphs that I mentioned might have more information than we'll really be able to pull off tonight. But you can see a little bit more detail, the 5 areas that students were reporting on. And the black line on both sides, left and right, indicates where our Campbell River average is. So when you look at optimism, that green line, it shows that we're right in line with the average for all districts. You can see in empathy, we're a little below, and so on. What you'll see is that in our, the black line is the average for all districts, and the green shows when we're past the green line, we actually have higher outcomes than the average. And what you can see as you look at the grade 7s, is you can see now that the black bar, rather than being inside the line, is now outside, which means that we're lagging in some of those indicators with our grade 7s. And you can see that there's a notable change and difference between our grade 4s and our grade 7s. So we'll look at the grade 7s in another way. We'll look at the grade 7s here, where Campbell River again is on the left and all participating districts are on the right. You can see that Campbell River has a higher degree of students who report positive adult relationships, but lesser after-school activities, lower scores on nutrition and sleep, and slightly lower scores on peer relationships compared to other participating districts, which is different than our grade 4s, which were above all of those participating districts. And again, we can see it reflected here, which is their well-being scale. We have more students in Campbell River that are reporting low well-being than our other participating districts, and lower in the thriving and medium range. So again, that indicates that there's less sense of well-being for our students in grade 7 than in the other participating districts, and again, some change between sites. One of the things that I share that does bring some concern is when we look at the measure of connectedness, we can take further data and look at it even closer. So when we dig deeper, one of the concerns we see here is that students, and we know how important a strong connection is at school, and you'll see that we are reporting below, so for 2 or more adults that are identified as close relationships for a student at school, we present below provincial average, slightly above for 1 and above average for none. So that's an area for us to continue to explore and to ensure, because we know how important that is for student achievement, to have that close connection in grade 7. I want to share this is out of 378 student records from last year. This is final report card data that shows where our grade 4s achieved on their school-based assessments for language arts, and we'll triangulate that with our FSA results. What you'll see, again, we have blue, and the blue bar representing all students and the orange bar representing Indigenous students. And of course, we're looking for parity, so we want to see the same in both for emerging, and we see a disproportionate number of Indigenous students in emerging and a disproportionate number in developing, and then less in the other categories. We'll look at the grade 7s. Again, a very similar data. The good news is that most of our students are past the emerging part of that, and I think we'll see that as well with our FSA results. But again, that concerning trend of our Indigenous students being overrepresented on the left side and underrepresented on the right side. Grade 10 language arts, again, final achievement data from report cards. We see again students getting A's and B's disproportionately, and then our Indigenous students overrepresented in our lower outcomes. This is our FSA results taken from the last 6 years. The FSA results are fairly static. Over the last 3 years, there's been a reduction in the not yet meeting, and we're starting to see a slow growth in students who are exceeding the expectations on the FSA and a small increase in those students that are meeting. So the trend is headed in the right direction, but again, very, very slow shift. We see in writing as well that we've going all the way back 6 years. You can see a fairly tall bar of the light blue, which is the not yet meeting, and a general shift down to around 18% instead of 32. We've also seen a slight increase in the meeting. And the grade 4 numeracy, again, we've had some up and down results. I think the last 3 years, we're seeing sort of results from 2017 slightly improving to 2018 and 2019. But we're really seeing the absence of exceeding. And so we've seen an increase in meeting and a decrease in not yet meeting, but almost a total absence of students exceeding expectations on the grade 4 numeracy within the FSAs. When we look at our grade 7 results, we see in grade 7 reading, generally the trend has been a decrease in not yet meeting and an increase in meeting over time with some variability year to year, but particularly the last 2 years we can see that the meeting expectations has increased and the not yet meeting is slowly decreasing. Again, of concern is that we have very few students achieving an exceeding result on their FSAs. And when we look at grade 7 writing, we see again variability year to year. I think last year of the 6 years, last year had the lowest of the not yet meeting. And again, a small marginal increase in exceeding, but still not as many students achieving exceeding as we think are possible or that we would like to see. And then our grade 7 numeracy is very similar to our grade 4 numeracy. It's had its ups and downs, but the not yet meeting was at 50% last year, which is a significant concern and an area that we clearly need to focus on. Interesting in the midst of that is we had more students that exceeded, but lots of variability year to year, and we need to see a change from those students who are not yet meeting and moving them into meeting or exceeding. A fairly new assessment that's been introduced by the ministry is the numeracy assessment. This is the grade 10 numeracy assessment. The total students, of the total students that wrote it last year, we had 19.3 students identified in the emerging, 40.3 in developing, 37% in the proficient, and 3.4% of our students that wrote were in the extending. And you can see that data has been aggregated or disaggregated, sorry, for female achievement, male achievement, and Indigenous. So the total students takes into account all of those folks, and then you can see with the different colors how our students are faring. And again, when we look at equity and parity of outcomes, we want to see we have an overrepresentation of Indigenous learners in emerging and developing, and less in proficient and extending. And again, wanting to make sure that we're moving. We want to see those students through their experiences in our system moving from the left to the right over time. So an emerging student that road to grade 4 FSA, we want to see them further either proficient or extending when they get to grade 7. We look at our literacy assessment. This is our grade 10 literacy assessment. So of the students that wrote the literacy assessment last year, and it shows some tremendous improvement over time in our system, which is we only had one student who was identified as emerging. 29.1% of our students were demonstrated developing proficiency, who were determined proficient. 67.7% of our students that wrote were deemed proficient. And again, very few students who were deemed in the extending category. So you can see again that those students that have moved from grade 4 to grade 7 to grade 10 have moved out of emerging, but again, an overrepresentation of Indigenous learners in the developing category and not enough in proficient and extending. So again, another space where our data indicates that our Indigenous students are not having the same outcomes as our Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And then I'm going to finish with this slide. This is a slide that shows 6-year completion rates for all students, for Indigenous students and special needs students. We have been referring to Indigenous students and special needs students as priority learners, and you can see from our data that we need to really press in to seeing some changes and improvements in student outcomes on behalf of those priority learners. So our overall 6-year grad rate in 1920 was 84.2%, which is below provincial average. And we see that gap of just a few percent there, but a very significant percentage gap between our Indigenous graduation outcomes of 58.9% and the province's average of 71% for Indigenous students. And again, another significant disparity with students who've been identified with diverse needs in our system with a 62.3% grad rate and a provincial grad rate of 73.8%. So with this, the good news about data, even if the data is difficult to see, is it really gives us targeted intervention, and that we need to continue to work through this data and other data points as we engage, particularly as we've started with the equity project this year, which is looking at where in our system our students are not experiencing equity, and then taking specific and direct action to address the inequity of outcomes in our district. And I think that there's clear evidence from the data that we see tonight of the importance of that work and the commitment that this board has made through their strategic plan and the actions they've taken since to ensure that parity is reached and that our students are equally well served in our system. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on the presentation? I guess not. You did a pretty thorough job, Superintendent Morrill. Oh, Trustee Hagan.
I think, yeah, this just clarifies our vision even more, that we prioritize these areas and identified in our strategic plan that this is where we want to go. And I think that's a good thing to say. Look at, here's the data and here's where we have to go. And our plan is accurate, and that's why we've identified it as a need. And we're going to place our resources, our time, our energy, our skills and ability, and eventually we'll start to see those levels, go the direction that we plan.
Thank you. It's a pretty strong dose of reality.
Yeah,
I think we don't. Nobody here has got any justification for any delusions. We have work to do. We're making progress, but there's still more to do. Any other comments? Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Morrill. We'll move to electorate and board matters, and we have notice of motion on 2 policies, and I'll ask Vice Chair Eddie to speak to those.
Yes, so I'd like to present a notice of motion as Trustee Kerr spoke to on 2 individual motions. One being on board governance policy number 1, and it's a small edit, but it is a defining statement regarding who the structure of the board. So we've added under the role of the board that more specifically the board, which is the 7 elected trustees. And then following that, the second addition is to policy 16, role of committees and representatives. And this policy has been updated to reflect some conversations that we've been having recently as a board regarding external entity requests. So the addition reads as follows. Representation to external entity requests that fall outside of the scope of the day-to-day operations of the school district shall be brought to the attention of the board. If the board decides that a representative is deemed necessary to effectively represent the interests of the board, the vice chair shall make an appointment recommendation to the board. Should it be determined by the board that the request be operational, staff appointment to or participation in this entity's request shall be made by the superintendent. The thought behind the rationale behind this process was that we just wanted to clarify the roles, define the roles between the superintendent and the board when it came to sitting on external entities. Are there any questions about that? So that will be moving forward for a vote into next meeting. If anybody if anybody has any further additions or would like any further conversation, they're welcome to reach out to the governance committee and we'll discuss it at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Eddy. Vice Chair Eddy. Okay, and the quarterly financial statement as of December 31st, 2020. Secretary Treasurer Patrick.
Yes, I'm presenting the December quarterly report, and it's about half year through the report for some functions, but it's about 4/10 of the way through other functions. And the this year's December quarterly report, because it is a little bit later than we normally put it out, we have adjusted the budget to the final budget that the board just passed. Usually when we are able to put the report out earlier, we use the preliminary budget. So right now the budget that is in the 2021 final budget, this column right here, is up to date. Now because we're halfway through, it's not as meaningful if we compare it to the full year budget. So in column D here, we have half of the year's budget. We have half the year's expenses and we compare it to half the year's budget. So the sheet that I'm starting on, this is really just a summary of the overall detailed package that you have. And I'll just kind of go through a couple of things on it. The Ministry of Education operating grant is the biggest funding source that we have. Halfway through the year, we should be at 23 million. We're at 22,934. So we're actually really close. And by the end of the year, we will be fully up to the ministry budget. The Ministry of Education does phase out our grants. They give us less in summer because they know we don't have as many costs, but they catch it up through the year. So that's positive. Ministry of Education other grants. So this is a case where even though we forecast that we will receive half the grants halfway through the year, we actually received a few grants early. So that's why that one would be significantly higher than what the half year would be. Going down through the rest of the revenues, rentals and leases, again, we received some prepayments on some of them, so that's where that sticks out. But when you look at the overall bottom line, we're really in line. Now, The other important thing to note is within the budget that we did just bring to the board, we did have a reduction in revenues from both the interest income, the international student, and the operating grant, and that is reflected here. So revenues went down, unfortunately. The expenses did not go down an associated amount. Now, again, the expenses are very much summarized, whereas we're pretty much on track for the revenues. We're actually under for some of the expenses right now. And historically, what we'll see is within services, contracts, and supplies, because we will budget unrestricted reserves that we know we won't always spend, we tend to be under. And that's part of what is showing right here. Another thing to note just on a general is we have had a lot of COVID expenses, and we've received a lot of grant funding for the COVID expenses. And right now our approach with those expenses is we will make sure that most of our expenses will be charged to the provincial and federal grants that we received. However, if at the end of the year we find we exceed those external grants, then we will have to pay for some of those excess costs out of these expenses here. So right now we're tracking well. We don't anticipate that we'll be overspending, but it's difficult to say till we get to the end of the year with what some additional expenses that we'll be facing. So you can see that overall expenses were tracking under by about 7%. I'm not going to go through each of these pages, but there's a lot of data, a lot of analysis here, and just some of the percentages are really what I kind of focus on. It's got overages. The dollar amounts are really less important as the percentages. And you know, where most of the expenses are tracking under, that's generally better. Within instruction, we're at 94%, which means that we have plenty of room heading to the end of the year. In district administration, we're actually quite a bit closer, but there is one item in here that I wanted to point out. QP staff within district administration, 50% of the year would be 131, and we're currently at $273,000. And so this is it looks like an overspend by 200% over the budget. But what is happening in this is we have a My Education reserve supported costs that are being paid out of this account, but they actually have been budgeted elsewhere. The other reason for the variance over the budget is you'll notice that the professional staff is under budget significantly. We did move to HR assistants that basically went from the QP column to the professional staff column this year. So that hasn't really been, those costs haven't been moved over yet. So when we go down looking at the rest of it, so if we do have excess COVID costs, we will see a lot of that in our operations and maintenance supplies, cleaning supplies, extra custodial. But again, right now we're showing that we're underspent by a significant amount, 716, and that is because we're able to assign a lot of those increased costs over to the special grants that we've received. Now, one area though where we haven't been able to, or that we haven't yet assigned over to the COVID costs, is we've actually relied on our transportation staff for some of our enhanced cleaning. And so as some of the expenses have been moved out of the operations, unfortunately they haven't been moved out of the transportation budget yet. So we are over budget here. I expected that by the end of the year, we will still be a little bit over budget, but we may be able to move some of those costs over as well. So I am, I think I'm going to answer. We do have lots of other data in the report, lots of good reading. And then on the last page, the other thing that I will show is just share there's a trustee and executive expenses. Again, there's nothing special to really point out here, but it is there for review if anybody would like to. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen right there. And I believe, is that back? There we are. So that is the quarterly report to date. It is March. We will have another one shortly after March. It probably won't be as delayed as this one was, but this is a good point just to make sure that we're on track for the budget that the board just passed. Are there any questions?
Don't see any questions. Okay. And then we will need a motion to accept the finance warrant. And Kevin, correct me if I have this incorrect, if I'm not right on this. The suggested motion would be that the finance warrant number 12 dated December 31, 2020 be accepted as presented.
Sorry, John, the finance warrant is later in the agenda. So this was a quarterly report for information for the board.
Okay.
And there's no motion required from the board at this time.
Okay. Then we will move on to educational issues. Student advocacy, read the mental health curriculum. Vice Chair Eddie.
Thank you very much, Chair Kerr. And thank you for allowing me the space to just highlight an article that appeared in the Vancouver Sun. It did come to me through the BCSTA's weekly update, daily update, and it was an interview with a grade 10 student named DJ Gill, and her advocacy to the Minister of Education is about the embedding of the mental health curriculum across all spectrums and all courses. I really, really appreciated her conversation regarding teenagers not looking to reach out to counselors if they maybe aren't familiar with them, about needing to have deeper connections in the schools. And I just wanted to highlight this, and it was interesting because after I read this article, I was quite taken with her points, and I did have an opportunity to pull up the mental health and school strategy that was released by the ministry, I believe in November of 2020. So moving forward, I'd be interested as a trustee to learn more about kind of what our vision is to follow through with our strategic plan objective and how we're embedding this new mental health strategy into our day-to-day class deliveries. That was it.
Are there any questions or comments for Vice Chair Eddie? Hearing none. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will then move into business administration, and we're back to you, Secretary Treasurer Patrick, operating grant comparison.
So on Friday, this past Friday, we've got our updated grant amount from the province. So in February, we submitted what we expected our forecasted enrollment to be. At the time, I had mentioned that we were projecting an increase in our base school age, but a decrease in some of our DL and continuing ed funding. And so the ministry will take those numbers, they will update their grants, and then they give us a detailed grant forecast, which is what we have here. So so this is an updated operating grant, and that is in the 2021-22 section. The height weights section is the updated numbers. The yellow section last year's. And sometimes it's good to just know, did you go up, did you go down? Obviously, if you go down, it means more challenge for the budget year. If you go up, then that's positive. So the big things to kind of start with is there was no new initiatives. There were no new policy changes. Really, there weren't a lot of big surprises. The province or the ministry increased most of the grants by the labor settlement increases for CUPE and for teachers. Again, they don't do any increases for any other staff, exempt staff, principals, or other costs. So that's what we see here. So so on the top line, the school-aged, you can see that the grant increased from 7,500 to 7,800. That was due to the wage increase, but we also had, it works out to about a 55 student increase in just the general FTE. So the 2021, that's where we finished the year at. We were projecting about a 54 student increase. So the total increase for the school age grant is substantial at $2,129,000. So again, that includes the wage increase as well as the extra 50 students. Now, most of our other items that we have submitted are relatively stable. So you'll see some changes are relatively small. So we are seeing a small decline in continuing education. We're seeing a decline in distributed learning. So even though the grants went up, because our FTE is going down, we're seeing less money for some of those. We alternate ed's fairly stable, but when we get down to this bottom part, again, we'll see a reduction in the continuing education and the DL accounts. Now, one thing that was actually kind of not nice or surprising is when you take the 54 student increase and you take away the DL and Con Ed reduction, it works out that we're going to increase by about 20 students. But one of the things that we are actually benefiting from is the student FTE that is declining, especially down here. The grant amount per FTE is less than the ones that we increased on. So that's a positive, is we're not, we're actually, again, we're reducing on the lesser amount, but we've gained on the higher amount. When we come down to English, ELL, Indigenous Ed, again, just general wage inflation increases. And same with this special education. Again, the numbers are relatively comparable to prior years, no significant changes, which is good. And then some of the areas where you potentially can see a pretty big swing, and I was really happy to see this, is our salary differential, the unique geographic factors. These things can actually swing significantly, like hundreds of thousands of dollars up or down. When it swings up, you know, it's helpful, but when it swings down, it can definitely be an unpleasant surprise. So both of them are relatively stable for this year. So so this was an unknown that we don't know until we usually get this, and so this was really positive to see. So right now our grants is, we're busy. Assistant Secretary Treasurer Renee McNeil's busy preparing the preliminary budget information that will begin just after spring break, and we'll be using a grant amount of $59,111,000. So about a $2.6 million increase. So so we know that we're going to build in wage increases. What we're still figuring out and determining is some of the rolled over costs, staffing, and that sort of stuff. Do they exceed the $2.6 million increase? We don't know that right now, but we will know that just after spring break when we begin our budget conversations.
Does anyone have any questions? Obviously a wonderful explanation. Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer Patrick. And we will move then on to item 14B, Finance Warrant number 12 for December 31st, 2020, and back to you.
Yeah, so we're just looking for the board to support the finance warrant number 12 for December 1st, or if you could support the December 31st finance warrant before the January one.
Did you have anything in there you wanted to speak to, or?
No, no, it's just updated finance warrant.
Okay.
Nothing unusual about it to speak to.
All right, so the suggested motion is that the finance warrant number 12 dated December 31, 2020 be accepted as presented, I'm sorry. Do we have okay, Trustee Franklin and Trustee Eddy. Is there any discussion on that? All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Okay, the motion is there anyone opposed? The motion is carried. All right, and we will move on to finance warrant number 1, this January 31, 2021. Anything to note in there that you want to address at all, Secretary Treasurer Patrick?
No, just that we are definitely catching up. Staff have are doing a good job getting caught up on a whole bunch of things, and this is one of them. So we'll January 31st is fairly recent, and we're happy to be presenting this to the board for approval.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, the suggested motion would be that the finance warrant number 1 dated January 31, 2021 be accepted as presented. Do we have a mover for that? Okay, Trustee Wilson, Trustee Hagan. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Okay, the motion is passed. And we will then move into other business. And Vista chapter meeting was held last week. I sent everyone a summary of the meeting. You should have received that in your email last Friday, I believe, so you had a chance to look at it. I don't know if anyone has any questions. It's pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any questions on the Vista meeting? All right. And the second item will be the BCSTA AGM, which will be April 15th to 17th, and that will be a virtual meeting. And I believe there will be a training session on the first morning to, I guess, get people up to speed on voting. So I think it's something that we're going to need to do. Trustee Wilson can speak to the issue of voting in a virtual meeting, and I think, do you want to say anything about that? Why it's important to do the training?
Yes, I will. It is important to get the training. It is simple once you have the concept, but it is complex until you've run through the process a couple of times. And when you're doing that times 400 or so people, that the time involved can stretch out a little bit. So I hope that they're going to have pre-training during the week before the conference itself. They offered it on 2 noon hours for the Provincial Council meeting. And even then, there were a lot of people who needed a refresher on the actual morning itself. So it took us well over half an hour to get everybody up to speed again, and then we carried on. But yes, if at all possible, make sure you attend one of the training meetings.
Okay, Trustee Hagan.
Yes, I found when we were voting, it was really helpful to have 2 devices, so your cell phone and the computer, That way you're not flipping back and forth and you can vote right away instead of trying to find where you have to go. I found that very useful.
Good suggestion. Vista is coming up too, but I'm really having difficulty finding details on that, and I will contact the Vista president to find out what exactly is going on and send an email out to you as soon as possible on that. We will be voting for a new executive this year. The current president will be stepping down, so there's already one candidate. The former chair of School District 71 has indicated her intention to run as president of Vista. I don't know if there are other people yet. Anyway, I will get that out to you as soon as possible as well. Okay, that comes to the end of our agenda, so we will then move to questions from anyone present on agenda items for the meeting. And Ms. Patrick, do we have anything yet?
No, Chairperson Kerr, we do not have any questions yet.
Okay, well, we'll give a minute or two just to, in case something's coming at a late moment. Trustee Hagan.
Yes, I was just wanting a little bit of update on our communication system with children at risk. I know that we were talking with the Ministry of Health, MCFD, our school district staff, and as well the Foundry. I just like to, for myself, I would like to know a little bit how we're making out with that, if we have a solid connection, if we have things in place so that we can't misinformation from one ministry to the next, because we just can't afford to let children fall through the cracks.
Superintendent Morrow, would you address that?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for the question, Trustee Hagan. Yeah, I'm pleased to report to the board that we've had an increased level of communication cooperation between the various ministries in the support of our youth. Definitely recognizing that we're about to embark on a 2-week vacation from school. This is when our student services team will meet with community organizations and ensure that the community is aware of students of concern and that there's multiple ways that those students will be checked in over the spring break. So yeah, just it's good to be able to report that there's been an increased level of cooperation and supports to ensure that our students are being taken care of.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
No, we do not.
I think if there were any questions that would have come in, they would have come in by now. So we will then move into the final item on the agenda, adjournment. Trustee Hagan, moved by Trustee Hagan. All those in favor, raise your hands. The motion is passed. We stand adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for a very